God desires to be in union with every human being. He wants to enter into our soul so He can elevate all that we are to a supernatural level. Why? Because God created us in His own image, with an immortal soul. He created us out of an abundance of love in order to be loved by Him and to perfectly love Him in return. When God created Adam and Eve, He created them in a state of true righteousness and holiness. Their minds, wills, and passions were perfectly ordered. They existed in a perfect relationship with themselves, with each other, and with all of creation. But when Adam and Eve committed the sin of disobedience, they disrupted this perfect harmony. We call this original sin. And the impact of bringing this sin into a perfect world was so devastating that it fundamentally altered human nature and humanity's relationship with God. God is the source of all life, physical as well as spiritual. When Adam and Eve turned away from God, death entered the world. Even worse, they immediately suffered a spiritual death. No longer could they pass on to future generations a perfect world. Instead, they passed on to us a world filled with pain, suffering, and sickness, as well as physical and spiritual death. Fortunately, the story doesn't end there. Through Christ's death and resurrection, the debt for original sin was paid. No longer did we have to suffer a spiritual death. Instead, He offered for us a path to reconciliation with God. The gateway to this path is baptism. It is the first step on a long journey back to God. The more complete this return, the more intimate our union with Him will become, and the more likely it is that we will attain the purpose for which we were created, to be perfect and eternally happy. When we are conceived in our mother's womb, we begin this journey from a standing start because we are born spiritually dead. We begin life only with the natural endowments of a wounded human nature. But our souls are made for much more. Indeed, they are created to be places where God Himself can dwell. Before God can dwell within us, however, we must first be set free from original sin and continue to be set free from its effects throughout our lives. Original sin is often called a stain or a blot upon the soul. But in reality, original sin is not a thing. It is the absence of something. It is darkness where there ought to be light. Babies are conceived and born outside of this fellowship with God. Baptism, then, is the means by which God reverses this reality by expelling the darkness and bringing light into our souls. During baptism, darkness is expelled as the priest prays an exorcism, asking God to set your child free from original sin. The darkness is vanquished and makes way for the light. The Holy Spirit comes to dwell in you. Just as when God flooded the earth to cleanse it, so too does the pouring of water on your child cleanse them. The spiritual vacuum disappears, and God becomes present in the soul, and the soul is created anew and begins to share in God's own life, which is called sanctifying grace. You may ask why, if baptism forgives original sin, there is still suffering, temptation, sickness, and death. First, it reminds us of the misery that always follows sin. Second, it gives us the opportunity to grow in virtue and holiness by demonstrating our love to God and to one another through spiritual battle and sacrifice. And third, we must still live with the consequences of our personal sin, or actual sin. The difference between original and actual sin is important. Original sin refers to our fallen nature and the spiritual darkness we are born into, whereas actual sin means those sins we commit ourselves through our thoughts, words, actions, and omissions. Baptism helps you overcome actual sin because God is now living within you and offers you the graces to fight your temptations and disordered passions. But you must learn to accept these graces and cultivate them within you to make progress in your spiritual life. You can do this by committing yourself to prayer every day, attending Mass each Sunday, reading the writings of the saints, and growing in virtue. In time, as your soul expands and is capable of receiving more and more graces, you become more and more free to choose the good, and you can overcome actual sin. This is an essential part of our journey back to God. He made you to be in union with Him, and He offers you the graces to return home. Those who are heroic enough to complete the journey are assured of eternal happiness in heaven.